Thanks for popping on and joining us today as we're getting set to do this live stream. Really excited about this. Hanging out with Owen King today. This is great. So I just finished the radio show and called the Strombo Show on Apple Music Hits. So we hung out on Apple Music Hits and we played a bunch of great songs, told some stories, and in part of that we talked about the fact that we were going to race home and do this today, which is kind of fun. So we started this book club with Apple Books a minute ago called Strombo's Lit. And the inspiration behind it really was so I could start reading again, to be honest with you. I felt like I spent most of my time losing myself, doom scrolling on social media and just kind of forgetting about the fact that long form books created so much joy in my life and they were so important to my development. They were so important to helping me develop some kind of self-confidence and understanding vocabulary and learning about different worlds and pushing myself creatively and also seeing what's out there. Like, frankly, what is possible? What could you do? Creative expression. And then I thought, oh, what the hell, like I normally do. If I'm gonna be interested in something personally, how can I find a way to connect it with you? And this has been a big part of what I try to do my whole life and my whole career is just share things with you, share good ideas with you. So Apple Music Hits for Monday to Thursday live at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 Eastern. And then we do Strombo's Lit, this book club with Apple Books as well. So far, we've had Neil Stephenson on, great speculative fiction writer, great writer. He was our very first one. Emily St. John Mandel, Ice-T and Spike with Douglas Sentry, wrote a book about split decisions. Rabia Chaudhry wrote a book called Fatty Fatty Boom Boom. We had Rabia on, and Daniel and Gabor Mate as well. And so as you can tell, we're not a book club that has one particular theme. We don't even stay with just novels. Sometimes it's nonfiction. Sometimes it is a novel. Sometimes it's a novella. Because really it is just about reading. And if you're able to read or listening to audiobooks, if that's how it is, it's really about sharing good ideas and using great authors to do this. So I am excited to get into this today. It's just really going to be a hang. That's all we're going to do. We'll do this, and Owen and I will speak, and then after Owen and I connect, we'll move on and we'll do some other stuff as well. And it's all part of Strombo's Lit, which I really love. I really love being able to share these books with you. Have you seen the new Evil Dead yet? Evil Dead Rise? It's pretty wild. And we'll get into that later on, this concept of horror and what is scary in this particular generation. But this is the book here, The Curator, written by Owen King. And listen, you see the last name King, and so you think King, son of Stephen King, brother Joe Hill. It's going to be a horror book. It's not a horror book. It has its scares, that's for sure. It has its moments in there for sure. But it is by no means a horror book. It's far more fantasy. It's far more than just that. And the one and only Owen King is with us right now from upstate New York. It is really good to see you, man. How are you?
I'm good, George. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Thanks so much for joining us today and being a part of Strombo's Lit.
Hey, the pleasure is all mine. This is very exciting to talk to everybody.
The Curator. When did you know you had a book? Like, we'll get into some of the details of it. You know how we both like baseball. You got to play 5.5 or so before it's officially in the books as a game, and rain can't run it. When did you know you had something here?
I mean, kind of right away from the beginning. You know, I had this idea for this character named Dora, who has found her way to gaining the curatorship of this strange little museum on this obscure little street in this unnamed city. And right away, I had this notion for a story that was sort of like a series of mystery boxes. You know, when we meet Dora, this revolution has just occurred, and we're in this sort of 19th century city. It's unnamed, but it's clearly a version of our Earth. And she, in this moment of upheaval, with some help from a man she's in a relationship with, she gains the curatorship of this little museum on this obscure little street. And then for reasons we don't entirely understand at the beginning, but then as the book goes along, we figure out that Dora isn't exactly who we thought she was. Mm-hmm. The museum isn't exactly what we thought it was at all. The street isn't what it seems to be. And the revolution itself isn't what it seems to be, without giving too much away. And so, you know, the idea that I had right from the beginning was had to do with, you know, concealing a number of different things and sort of slowly unwrapping them and exploring this world at the same time that I had dreamt up, you know, one morning.
When I read it, I I got lost in the world, and there has much been said about the size of the world that you have created here and the myriad tales you could tell in subsequent books if you wanted to. But what started to hit me about a third into it was what a really interesting approach to closure. And that if somebody's looking for it in their life, their Dee, as she thinks of herself in this book, you say for those who haven't quite read it yet, you're going on a journey of somebody trying to find answers and make sense out of a trauma that happened when they were young. And then when you revisit that traumatic moment, it's really quite haunting.
Yeah, and it's funny. I had somebody ask me something along the lines of how do you deal with a character's grief and their memories and how that informs the character. And I thought about it, and Dee, which is how she thinks of herself, and that's sort of the first clue in the book that she isn't exactly who she seems to be, is that
Mm-hmm.
she's Dora to everybody else, but she's Dee to herself. Um, she is driven by this traumatic loss that she suffered as a child and that totally distorted everything that followed in her life. And so that uh, need to understand what happened to her family and specifically to her brother drives the things she does. But she isn't just the product of her trauma. The what makes her, I hope, a compelling character is that she is super observant and super intelligent, and that part of her is inherent, if you know what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
And so it isn't it is kind of an interesting thing, I think, the different parts of us. We're not any one thing. We're sort of a mix of the our experiences and also, you know, just whatever we are to start with.
And in a way, we start to become more of one or two things based on, for so many people, based on the walls, the guardrails they bump into as they're trying to figure out who they were. And so much of Dee and Dora is cultural and era based for her, what she can be, where she's from, and what is expected of her.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, she is. I think one of the things that's hopefully appealing about the character is that in this 19th century world that she finds herself in this very patriarchal society, there are a lot of rules that she has to abide by that make her life harder. But she's so smart and so clever and so observant, she's able to work her way through a lot of problems that all the men around her don't realize she's sort of seeing her way through, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. Why tell the story through Dee's perspective?
Um, I think it's because it's her story. The core of the story is that she wants to understand this thing that happened to her as a child, and so she's right at the center of it. But also because I think that she is her place in that world is the most interesting to me because she's the underdog.
Right.
She is the one that everybody overlooks and underestimates, and uh, that positioning makes her, I hope, extra fun to root for.
And you give us enough of her, and I think to my earlier statement, a thought about the world, the size of this world. Well, first of all, you say it right at the very beginning of the book. It's unmappable, and I think you
Right.
tell everybody right in basically in your opening paragraph, opening chapter, you're telling everybody you're going to get a lot, and it's going to be kind of impossible to contain all of this. So throughout this story, you take us through a bunch of different worlds, through a bunch of different people's point of view.
Yeah, and that's what I mean, the book is supposed to be kind of like a fantastical Victorian novel, like in the mode of Dickens or Trollope or something like that. I mean, obviously, I can't write with that sort of virtuosity, but I'm trying to you know capture a little bit of that. And one of the things I love about uh, books like Great Expectations and Bleak House is the way that they survey a whole society, right?
Mm-hmm.
Dickens was so good at that, at showing the lives of the people who are really struggling and the lives of the people who have it really easy and the lives of the people who have, you know, challenges and are sort of in the middle. Um, and so I I think that's a great, I mean, that's my favorite kind of book is when you see that whole world. Uh, and in a book that has to do with a revolution, the elites have been tossed out. The royalist government has been tossed out at the very start of the book. I think that's a really useful approach is to see how everybody is doing
Hmm.
and why people uh, wanted to revolt, why other people didn't want there to be a revolt, and what they have it's what they could lose. You know, what's at stake for them, and sort of take that whole view and sort of bounce between various characters back to D,
Hmm.
and sort of stretch our legs out that way.
I think what I like too about the way you approached it, we're talking with Owen King here, the author of the book, The Curator. Our selection here for Strombo's Lit is that the revolution part, the war part of it, is kind of in the wings. And a lot of what we're doing here is we're experiencing aftermath. And you know, I know that everybody can apply their own meaning or take their own thing away from the book, or any book that they read. But there is, you feel that class war in here. You see how it, you see parallels. You can connect to, you know, and I think a lot of good fantasy feels real on some level, and you get that here.
Yeah, I think that, and that's important to me. You know, it's hard to buy into, for me anyways. I mean, everybody has a different, you know, ability to suspend disbelief, right?
Hmm.
With different kinds of movies and books and things. But for me, I need like a certain kind of grounding, and I want to believe that the world is real, and then uh, find my way to the supernatural stuff, to the fantastic stuff, and it's sort of like you are getting used to the, you know, the heat of the water
Hmm.
of this particular bath as you sink into it. So I think that it just makes it all more compelling if there's a grit to the world, and you really, you know, you feel like the people are really, you know, they have lives, you know,
Hmm.
that they eat dinner and go to work and do all the things that people do in real life, and then that they're experiencing these magical things the way that a real person might, with a lot of astonishment and in the context of the real world that they live in.
Well, not only does it have grit, I think there, if I recall, there's also a true grit quote in the book at some point, isn't there?
Yes, there is a true grit quote about you know, there's a lot of cats in the book.
Yeah.
This city, there's a portion of the society that still adheres to an older religion, and that religion worships cats. And
Hmm.
so there's a number of feral cats that are considered holy creatures in this city to the people that adhere to that particular religion. So and then there's even a cat that has a significant role, although we never get her
Hmm.
perspective. We just see the things that she does. And so the quote at the beginning of the book is the one from True Grit, where Maddie says something along the lines of, "Cats are useful but wicked. Who hasn't seen Satan in their sly faces?" I
That's
think
right.
that's something along the lines of what Portis wrote,
That is it.
and I always loved that. Yeah, it's something like that.
And we'll get to cats in a bit, but the other thing about the way I think cats connected to ancient religion in this particular story is the cats are rather ambivalent about the fate of their, for the most part, which I think if you have in any way rejected religion in your life, you feel that there is more accuracy there than those who haven't feel. When you're telling these stories and you're talking about people going through different stages of the economic struggle or wherever they are in class or wherever. Are you thinking about what's happening today? Are you thinking about the real world in this particular moment?
I there's no doubt that it's in there. It's more, I think, unconscious as I was writing, but certainly this isn't a big spoiler. One of the principal motivations for this revolution is that there's a well-to-do maker of ceramics, and he gets in a bitter dispute in the 19th century style with a very rich government official, and they have an argument via tabloid with each other. Basically,
Hmm.
they're actually pamphlets. They're writing pamphlets back and forth to each other about how mad they are, and the one guy's mad because the other guy hasn't paid up. And uh, and so the ceramics maker confronts the rich government official in the street, and the government official shoots him dead in front of a bunch of witnesses. And certainly, I wrote that because I felt like that's where the story was going, and it wasn't until after I wrote it I thought to myself, "Oh, that's exactly what Trump said
Yeah, you could shoot somebody in Fifth
about
Avenue.
shooting somebody in Fifth Avenue." And in the book, the guy gets away with it.
Right.
He shoots this unarmed guy in the street, and the courts, which he has access to and are full of his friends, they ruled it it's self-defense. So things like that. There's certainly that's the most direct parallel, but we live in a society that is very unequal in many ways, and I think the book, which is set in this other time and place, it must it has to carry those echoes because that's where I'm writing from.
That's right. That's Owen King. The Curator is his latest novel. This is part of our book club we're doing with Apple Books right here. You can see the book. So you can't judge a book by its cover, as you know, but there is a crucial red door on here, and the cats are definitely featured heavily on the cover
Yep.
of this copy that I have here. Going back to your first book, and I think everybody who creates art, certainly when you're writing anything long form, family invariably plays a role in it. And I wondered, as you got older and have experienced more in your life, how you approach families differently. Because, Dee is on this thing, a lot of it deals with her family. Your first book dealt with family. And I just wondered how you changed your approach to writing about family.
Well, I mean, the biggest thing, you have like a greater sense of what it means to be an older person, to be in a different position, to be, for instance, in my case, uh, I have older parents now. When I wrote my first book, it was about um, this teenage kid who's got this very difficult relationship with his mother, and is estranged from his father, and his sort of conspiring with his slightly unhinged grandfather to protect a billboard.
Hmm.
Haven't thought about it in a while. And of course, my grandparents were still alive when I wrote that book, and now they're not. So, I mean, the passage of time does change the way you think about being a child, the way you think about being an adult. It's just totally, I'm a totally different person.
Right.
Well, I shouldn't say I'm not a totally different person, uh, but that particular person who wrote that book is, boy, he's a distant memory. He had all black hair, and he could eat anything he wanted.
Yeah.
It is a little bit. I think this is I'm sure that artists of every medium feel this way. It's sometimes slightly disconcerting to encounter your younger self. You read something you wrote when you were, in the case of that book, I wrote that when I was, I guess, between 26 and 29, something
Hmm.
like that. And when I look at it, it's been a while. I mean, I look at some of it, I'm like, wow, how did I do that? That was pretty good. And then other parts of it, I'm like, why did I do that? That's terrible. And and then there's also other parts where you're like, wow, I don't relate to this at all, because that feeling of whatever I was outraged about at the time,
Hmm.
and that's kind of what drives you a lot, I think, through a story is, wherever the rage or the conflict of it lies, just totally different things.
And
now than
the stakes are different in
as a
many.
comparison to then. Yeah,
True.
exactly.
Yeah, stakes are definitely different, but there's also, and I think guys of our generation. I'm a little bit older than you, but people of our generation didn't see our faces as often. We weren't as reflected back, and of course, you come from a family, a very successful family, so you have a different relationship with it than other people do. But the self awareness maybe wasn't the same back then, and so you have, and I know it's not a binary choice, but if one road was self conscious writer and the other road was reckless abandon writer, which side did you lean towards more often than not?
And I think that you know what, George, I think you just nailed it. Really, that's kind of what I was thinking about. Is when I wrote that first book, just total reckless abandon, right? And for better and worse. But I think being a lot more self-aware is, I wouldn't go back.
All right.
Or because if I did go back, I would be a much more cautious writer, um, with the material that I was exploring. Um, yeah, I think that's a big change, and there is something to be said. I guess uh, there's definitely something to be said about writing with reckless abandon, but I think there's more to be said about having more control over, uh, thinking more about the themes, thinking about them from a more experienced perspective.
But you know what? Remember that great
I
Bob?
prefer
Remember that
that.
great Bob Dylan line? I was so much older then. I'm younger than that now. It's like shit.
Yes.
I think I know shit now, but I don't know if I do anymore.
Right. Well, that makes me think of that Warren Zevon line about the shit that used to work, it don't work
Yeah,
now.
ain't that the truth? Oh man,
You're
war.
right.
I think at least once a week I play Lawyers, Guns, and Money in my
Yep.
life, just because I think when he says, "Ah, "Get me out of this, get me out of
Get me
here,"
out of this,
I,
yeah.
I love it so much. The You obviously no stranger to literature in your home, but the other thing you're not a stranger to is how hard it is to do this. Like the amount of hours it takes, the craft required for this. Did you ever doubt your ability to make a go of this for a living?
Yeah. I've told this story a lot, but when I was growing up, my parents are both novelists, and I would hear them, well, I would see them go to work every day at home, uh, from a very young age, and the door would close, and then the typewriter keys would start clattering, and that would go on for hours on end. And so it was quite sobering to see the amount of effort that went into writing books as a child, because my parents would go in their offices and they would be there alone for all that time. It seemed not only uh, quite an undertaking to sit so still for so long, day after day after day, but to also have no colleagues. I
Right.
found that um, uh, that was a lot to quite overwhelming idea as a child, and I loved books. I loved to read. I loved to tell stories, but I wasn't sure I wanted to do that, um, because it seemed so hard and it seemed so lonely. But as I got older, I got more focused on making the effort, making the commitment, and sort of insisting to myself that I use the time that I had uh, to write, especially when I was in college and doing other things, to always use whatever time I had to sit and do it. And it didn't really become second nature until I was, I don't know, probably into my late 20s, where it was like, this is the fun thing that I like to do
Right.
whenever I can. I mean, there were lots of times before that it was fun, but there were lots of times where it wasn't fun, where I wished I could do something else. So, it's that that part of it does take practice.
Yeah. And I think too, we're getting more and more awareness of this now. Like, culturally, it gets talked about a lot more. But just the power of expression, and so many people who feel maybe a little clobbered by what's happening around them, to be heard. To be heard in and of itself is a landmark moment, and so many people don't get that. So for you, just this idea of finding an outlet to express the kind of massive swirling set of characters and ideas that you had in your head, just the impact that expression would have had on you.
Um, I, I, I think about it a lot. I guess when I'm telling a story and when I've got an idea for a novel, I'm thinking about it a lot more. Even though the world of the book is so big, it's very small to me when I'm working on it, because it's just one little brick each day. And I'm just working really hard on coloring in that little square of the canvas each day, and then building it up. And I'm thinking all the time about the bigger part of it, but I get really focused on the little small part that I can do each and every day. I feel like if I think too much too quickly, I could get swamped, and I don't want to. I want to slow it way down when I'm making a book.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe part of what you're getting at is that there's so much all the time in our lives, uh, it- like and it's happened fast. There's this book, it's by Mark Jacobson, and it's called Pale Horse Rider. And one of the things that he says in it is he writes about how the guy who found the weather balloon at Roswell was Pat Garrett's either grandson or great grandson, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was in what, the 40s or the 50s?
Yeah.
And now, uh, like, our cars can drive themselves. And we know plenty of people that were alive when Roswell happened, right?
Right.
So you think about like that frog jumping quality, jumping from one lily pad to the other. And that's a great book, by the way, just a little small
Mm-hmm.
aside in the book. And you think about that, and it's just like it's a lot for a human mind to take in, right? And so one of the pleasures that I get from reading uh, is the slowing way down, and the kind of books that I am trying to uh, books like Great Expectations and Bleak House and those Victorian novels, the books that are kind of one part of what I was thinking about when I was writing this one. I particularly like the way those books slow
Mm-hmm.
everything down, and they're so immersive and uh, full of life, but at the same time, they make your head quiet because you want to be in there and hear everything that everybody is saying and see everything that everybody is doing. And I like that focused experience you get from those books, but really from any great story. Um, I don't know. We started with expression,
Yeah.
and
But I
we went to things going really fast and things going really slow.
But I think it's the expression is what provides us the opportunity to make sense of it all in our own way, just because the human brain is not evolving at the speed of the technology, right?
Right. Well, I think it's probably evolving, but it has to do a lot of work that it didn't, until recently have to do. And a lot of it's great, but I think that one of the special appeals of fiction or nonfiction that tells a great story is the way that uh it can uh narrow that aperture way down and take you on on a trip.
I think it's also a very singular experience in that we can consume so much now. There's so many things to watch and to see and to listen to and to experience. There's so much happening at the same time, but largely your emotions, you're going on the trip they want you to go on. But when that's with TV, film, or whatever, when you read a novel, no two people read it the same way. So because I'm inventing what your world looks like to me, and people I've talked to about this book, they see it differently than I do, and it's a very much the curator is my experience in a way that no one else can replicate.
Yeah, and I love that about I love that interaction with the reader. You know, the audio reader Marin Ireland,
Yeah.
who did the book, you know, one of the things she's so good. One of the things I got a big kick out of was listening to her do some of the dialogue scenes, and a lot of the characters she would do, I'd be like, God, this is just like I imagined in my head. But then other times, she would bring her creativity to it and do a voice that was different than I imagined. But then I'd be like, wow, this is better, you know? And that's one of those things where it's really cool to see this other creative force sort of interacting with what you wrote. Um, but yeah, definitely, no one sees a character the same way. And then if you know, when books get turned into movies, sometimes it can be a little bit hard to get rid of
Yeah.
the actor's face.
Yeah, almost nobody knows how The Shining ends in the book anymore, right? They just know the
Right.
scenes in the movie.
But then other times, you know, I something like True Grit, I love the film, and I think about those. It's almost like the characters of the movie are one version of the story that I love, but then when I read the book, they don't exactly look like Jeff Bridges and
Right.
I forget the name, Haley
Stanfield.
Steinfeld,
Yeah.
Steinfeld.
Yeah.
Yep.
For the that's right. The when you listen to the book back, or when you're forced to relive the book now, when you talk about it, do you want to change parts of it? And I ask you that in that the guy from Friends wrote the book where he said that stupid shit about Keanu Reeves, just really
Right.
dumb shit. And who was it? Matthew Perry, I forget his name. But anyway, he said that stuff about Keanu. And now he said in subsequent publications that won't be happening. We're hearing that for cultural reasons, there are things that existed in movies or shows that are being re-edited now. And so the piece is never abandoned. Like Neil Peart once said, it's been attributed to others, but I remember Neil saying, a song is never finished, it's merely abandoned. And
Right.
so, you know, you put all this work into finally deciding the book is done, and now there's this opportunity to just keep changing it. And I know that's not a new thing, it's happened before, but do you ever want to go change the things you've done knowing that now it's far more acceptable?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it's really hard to ever be satisfied. You know, if I did a reading from the book, uh, I know that I would change things for the reading. Um, just because as I was going along, certain things would sound a little better to me on that occasion out loud. But you know, I think this certainly with every other book I've ever written, gosh, probably by 2 months after publication, I've thought to myself, this one thing could have really been a lot better. But with this one, you know, there's a couple things I've thought about, and I don't know, it feels a little closer to being the realized version of what I had in my mind. So right now, I'm pretty happy with it.
Nice. When you were writing the story through the perspective of a woman in different stages of her life, going on different journeys, you can research all kinds of stuff. But when you are telling the story from a young woman's perspective, how did you research? Who did you talk? Did you talk to your wife? How did you do this to get a real, authentic sense of her?
Well, I mean, I tried to imagine what the challenges of her life. I mean, she's a domestic servant when we meet her, right? And so I did a lot of research about what the lives of domestic servants were like in the mid and late 19th century and the kind of work that they did, um, the things that they were exposed to, the dangers, the poverty that they lived with, and I wanted to do justice to that experience. Um, and so that was I mean, that was the big thing is I did research that pretty heavily, but it is a fantasy world,
Hmm.
so it's I didn't have to adhere to um, very particular moments in history unless I wanted to, because it's kind of like an alternate Earth.
Yeah, you can make it up.
But you know, my wife is a novelist, great novelist. Her name's Kelly Braffett, and you know, Kelly's always one of my first readers. And if she thought something was, you know, striking a sour note, she would say so. But you know, I think whoever the character is, you want to get in their shoes and really imagine what the challenges are in their life and what the things that they love and the things that they want, and maybe especially the things about them that a reader isn't going to love, right? Because
Hmm.
we're all imperfect,
Right.
and uh, you want your hero, you want your protagonist to be uh, as real, or at least I do, as possible, and that means that they're imperfect. That means that they're flawed.
Some of this comes from real places, right? Like the Morgue ship.
Yeah, yeah. There's a one of the big plot points is there's a the ceramics maker that we spoke of. After he
Hmm.
dies, he's put on a boat that's parked in the river in the city, and people come and look at his corpse. And this morgue ship is based on something that I read about in a book called The Killer of Little Shepherds by Douglas Starr. And there was a real ship in Lyon in France in the 19th century. And I knew before I wrote the book that people at that time would go to morgues and look at dead bodies, that it was sort of an amusement, which
Hmm.
is a little bit hard to grasp, but was the case. But I didn't know
Now we just go to
about,
Twitter. By the way, we get the same
right.
effect on Twitter.
But now, but I didn't know that in this one case that the morgue that people would come and look at bodies on
Hmm.
was docked on a river, and in real life, the boat was blown away in a storm and crashed, which is horrible. But in the book, this boat disappears and becomes a sort of growing force of mystery in the city. People say that they see it in the air and on the river and in alleyways, and that it's kidnapping people. And that eventually pays off, I hope.
Yeah, when it sort of you kind of give it some power. You give it like a redemption story in a way for the people who would have died on those boats in whatever way you can.
Yeah, it gets a little bigger and bigger and bigger as it's this thing that gets mentioned, and then this thing that gets mentioned a little bit more and talked about, and then it keeps coming.
It's pretty
It
incredible,
sails
actually.
closer.
The a movie is done, and then by the time it's edited, posted, and released, depending on the studio plans or whatever, it's a long time afterwards. And then when you talk to somebody, it's a distant memory, that experience. How far away are you from the curator?
Um, I'm pretty far away. Since I've just been doing you know, interviews and appearances for it, I have thought about it a little bit more. Um, but yeah, it's definitely in the rearview mirror a bit, and I'm thinking about the next things, and um, but I still I think that it goes back to that feeling of it being a little bit more fully realized, maybe than um, I mean, I love all my books, but or I'm proud of them all, but this one feels a little more fully realized. So maybe stepping back in and talking about it is a little bit more fun because I'm more satisfied. So, um, but like with anything, and I always wonder about this with like with painters and musicians and songwriters and things. I will say that when I read it, and this is experience I have with pretty much everything I've ever written, is I often am like, God, what was I thinking of when I came up with this? Or, how did I compose it? And that makes it sound like I think it's really great, but it's more along the lines of, I just don't remember.
Yeah.
You're in a little bit, or I always like go into a little bit of
Like a fugue
it's a
state.
little bit out of body when you're writing it. Yeah, it's a little bit of a fugue state when I'm writing. So, and it's very conscious when you're rewriting, but the farther you step away from that original composition, the more sort of uh, mysterious it seems.
If anybody's listening to this now or checking this out, and they're writers in and of themselves, and they're trying to figure out names for characters or other ideas, do you recommend just going to cemeteries?
I do. I love doing that. I
You,
love
you
doing
got
that.
characters in
Did I
this
write?
book. You have a character in this. Isn't it the general named after somebody you read?
Yeah, I did. I can't. I must have mentioned that in an interview or something. Yeah, I'm giving away one of my great secrets, but one of the things I love to do is looking at I love looking at gravestones for names, for interesting names. I saw this guy. Actually, I can't remember what the full name of the person was, but I saw the name Gildersleeve in a cemetery once, and I thought to myself, "Wow, that is very evocative to me, that name." And I ended up giving that name to the general in the book. But I like looking at plaques and public buildings, memorials, things like that. You see a lot of really interesting um, names, and because usually they're from a different period of time, and so it's not something that you hear all the time. And sometimes a name can almost make a character.
100%. You actually
Sort
do.
of sort of knit one out of air, just based on, Gildersleeve sort of knitted himself based on that last name.
I think even when you start talking about the history of the people who ruled the land, the governors, the name from the furthest one back is more evocative, and then the most recent one is a very basic name. I think you even use that to tell the passage. I forget the name of the kid, but like Kyle or Jack or something like that. You start,
Right,
you
right,
start,
Kyle.
you start
King
with,
Kyle.
you start with something like that. Lest anybody think it's macabre that you go to graves, by the way, I remember speaking with Chuck Palahniuk one day, and he said he would go with legal pads, yellow legal pads. He would sit in the emergency room of a hospital eating vending machine snacks, just feverishly writing, feeding off the energy of what was collapsing inside that room. So you're still much cleaner than that.
That's good to hear.
The evolution of you as a writer is one thing, but I wonder if you have a set of things that you want to be able to do, but you're not quite sure you're there yet. I've spoken to filmmakers before, and they say, I want to make this kind of picture, but I just don't think I'm ready. As a storyteller, do you have something you want to build to?
Uh, I think it's more that I like to try to do something different each and every time. Uh, so right now I'm working on a comic book with a friend, and it's a California set noir. And I've never written anything quite like that before. When I wrote The Curator, I'd never done a full fantasy world. Before that, double feature was about filmmakers. I loved movies, but I hadn't studied film. So I'm always trying to, maybe more than I should, kind of reinvent what I'm doing with every book. Um, but I don't know if there's, I would love to write a book set in another country. I think that would be a really interesting thing to do, but I think I would have to live in another country, and I haven't had the opportunity to do that. So, um, and I also would have to feel like my outsider's perspective was interesting enough, I suppose,
Right.
to do that.
Didn't you at one point want to tackle Chernobyl? Did I hear you say that once?
I had an idea. I had an idea for a book a story that had to do with it. I don't think I had the capacity for it. So yeah, that would be the kind of thing. I definitely don't need to do that now because they did such an amazing
Yeah.
job with the miniseries. But I think it's a if there's something sort of some sort of dream project that's like beyond my grasp, it would be something that was set in another country for sure.
And there's, I guess, things that you learn along the way. So who knows where the idea can come from? I've heard you say you've got a couple of things you're kicking around now for the next project, or any of them down the road.
Yeah, I mean the comic book I've been writing with my friend Jesse Kellerman, that's going to be officially announced pretty soon. We've already shown the cover of it. It's called Self-Help, and it's I guess it would be it's kind of it's kind of a comedic crime story. It's a noir, but it has some laughs in it, hopefully. And I'm very excited about that. I love the way that's coming out. And first two issues are all drawn and inked, and so hopefully in the fall, or late summer or fall, that'll come out. And yeah, and I'm kicking around a few book ideas at the moment, typing away on a few things, and we'll see where those go. But whatever it is, it'll be something pretty different.
It's
Which
funny.
in a way is too bad because I did really enjoy doing this.
This particular book, yeah, and there's so many things you could do
Yeah.
inside it, for sure. Is there a maybe you've already sold the rights? Are you going to make this? Is there TV? Is there a movie? Like this strikes me as more TV series than movie in terms of just the scale of it.
I'd love it if that happened. I think that it's a little bit like something like Penny Dreadful,
Yeah.
would be the vibe. So you never know. I would be thrilled with that, and I always love to see what the way that people who do that for a living, who make film and TV, the way that they interpret a book. It's always exciting, you know?
Yeah, yes, true, but sometimes it can be a real pain in the ass when because you can feel like they wrecked it for you. Have you ever had that? Like that's a part of it too, I'm sure.
Has that happened to you? Where you saw where you there was a book you really loved and then you saw the film and you were like, oh man, they kind of spoiled it for me.
You know,
I'm sure that's happened to me, but I can't think of anything right off the top of my head.
yeah, I tend to. I'm now doing the opposite. What I'm trying to do is see the film first, and then I'll go read the book for. Quentin Tarantino just put out the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood novel, where he
Yeah.
expanded all these stories. And I read the book after seeing the film, and I went, "Oh, I get this now. I feel connected to them in a different way." So I like the way that's working. How long do you think? I'm sure it's already happening, but how long do you think authors whose names we recognize will publish books that AI wrote, and they'll be cashing the checks and doing none of the work? How do you feel about that?
I think I'm still trying to wrap my mind around it. I'm sure people are already using it. And there's probably, again, I got to think about it a little bit more. There's probably some creative argument to be made for, you know, working something up with an AI and then rewriting it. I don't know. It doesn't seem very appealing to me. But I mean, at what I've read of things composed by AI, it doesn't, to me, it doesn't seem quite like the thing. But do I feel that way because I know what it is? I don't know. But it doesn't, it seems like, kind of plastic to me.
And the scary part, I suppose, is where we were 5 years ago to where we are now. And to your earlier point about the leapfrog, that gap might close more and more. But I do think that there's nothing that will replace the human expression. Otherwise, it's just clip art, and even that's got its value. But the human expression is really, I think, so powerful. And in there, the happy accident, the soul, the masterpiece, the whatever it is, that I don't know if anybody's got that yet.
Yeah, I just it just doesn't hold a whole lot of appeal to me to write using that kind of program. It so much of the pleasure and so much of the well, all of the pleasure comes from figuring these things out myself. I don't really want any help, if that makes sense.
Right.
Probably some people think I should get some help, but it's just it's the way it's what I enjoy doing. I would sort of hate to give any of that up.
Before I let you go, I think aside from the Sutherland family, between you, your brother Joe, and your dad Stephen, I think I've interviewed three members of this family, all in the same walk of life, but doing it all very differently. And I wondered if that was very conscious for you.
I wouldn't say well, when I was younger, I think that I was really focused on um, writing stories that were totally reality based as like a differentiating uh, thing. But now I sort of just write what I feel excited about writing. So I don't know if those differences are so conscious. It's just everybody's sort of following their own star.
It must be liberating too now that you're not trying to differentiate yourself. I mean, you do it naturally.
I think that's right. I think that's right. But you can't just appear anywhere. You have to start somewhere and find your way to what you really want to do. And I like the previous books, but for sure this one f feels the most like uh for better or worse, specific to me.
The Of all the people I've spoken to over the years, are there themes that seem to appear often and often, and so many of them are some kind of validation from people in their life. What do you do when your walk of life is something that your family is really good at as well? And do you seek validation from them? Do you require validation from somebody who is, like who your dad is, who your mom is, who your brother is?
I, um, I want them to like the things that I write for sure. They're not always going to like it though, because no one bats 1,000.
Yeah.
But I will say I think that even from the very beginning, I sort of know I'm working inside of a pretty enormous shadow, and you can't try to live up to that. You can only sort of try to live up to yourself and do what you can do. Um, so that form of validation is something that I'm not reaching for because it's so unrealistic and so it would be I don't want to say artificial. Maybe that's the word I'm looking for. Uh, but I can only be me is the bottom line. So that part of it, the person you're most trying to please when you create something is yourself, right?
Right.
I mean,
In
that's who you
hopes.
start. You've got to when I write a book, my first uh reader is me, and I want I want to delight that guy.
Right.
And then, hopefully other people are going to like it too. Because if nobody does, then you can't publish it. But
Do you have an order? Like your wife will read it first, and then does it go to your
yeah.
mom second before an editor? Does it go to your dad? Does it go to Joe? Like, how does it go?
I go Kelly reads my books first, and then I have a couple of friends who've read all my books, and they probably get it around the same time, and then then it would sort of move outwards toward the family. I always try to also, and I think this might be a useful tip for people who are working on their own writing, is I think there's something to be said for finding somebody who you think is really smart, that you know a little bit but doesn't have a personal stake in you,
Right. Right.
and get them to read your work, because you oftentimes from that person who's really smart but isn't necessarily a close friend, you can get a really unvarnished take.
which is really important.
You got to have it.
You got to have it. Owen, it's been an absolute pleasure spending this time with you. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you, George.
I really appreciate it. The Curator
and thanks to everybody tuning in. Appreciate it.
This is the latest book from Owen King. It's called The Curator. It's a hell of a read. There's a lot in here, but it moves, which I think is, and I think it's a testament to you and the world that you created. Looking forward to catching up with you again next time, buddy. Be well.
You too.
All right, bye. So great to have Owen King on the show there and hanging out with his little Strombo's Lit book. So Apple Books is who we do Strombo's Lit with. So if you want to check it out, we put a whole bunch of stuff on our social media, on my Instagram page, Strombo as well. You'll see there's a tab dedicated to Strombo's Lit. All these conversations posted there and on the YouTube channel. And of course, we're always sharing books and film ideas and music right at the top of that on a daily show on Apple Music Hits. So we're 5 o'clock Pacific there, 8 o'clock Eastern Time, back again tomorrow. Thanks for hanging out with us today, and we appreciate it. We'll catch you next time.